Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to U.S. History Through Film as we discuss the worksheet accompanying the movie Lincoln. Now, number one mentions the Battle of Poison Springs, where the Rebs killed every Negro soldier they captured. This was a real battle, fought on April 18, 1864, where black Union soldiers were slaughtered, as usually happened to black Union troops captured by the Confederates. The most infamous case was the Fort Pillow Massacre, committed by soldiers under the command of General Nathan Bedford Forrest, but they happened elsewhere. At Poison Spring, some of the Union soldiers were scalped or otherwise mutilated by Choctaw Indians serving in the Confederate Army, although in turn, many of those Choctaw Indians had had their homes raided by the U.S. Army. American Indians incidentally fought on both sides of the war. In many cases, tribes split and had members fighting on both sides. Cherokee, for example, fought against Cherokee. Number 6 introduces Lincoln's wife, Mary, whom he calls Molly. And he did have dreams before many major battles. The dreams shown in the movie is very closely based on a description of his dreams Lincoln once gave to the Secretary of the Navy, feeling the Secretary of the Navy would benefit, I guess, from hearing about a dream. A recurring dream involving a ship. That seemed the Secretary of the Navy's alley, I guess. Number 18, as Lincoln sometimes uses his war power to ignore the court's authority. And this was true. Lincoln interfered with many civil rights. He arrested people without a writ of habeas corpus, essentially meaning without a warrant, including the governors and legislatures of Maryland and Kentucky, out of fear they might vote for secession if they were free. When the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, Roger B. Taney, told Lincoln that was illegal, Lincoln threatened to imprison him too. He sometimes shut down newspapers, sometimes had civilians tried in military courts, which the U.S. Supreme Court later declared to be unconstitutional, although not till after the war was over. Number 21 introduces Fernando Wood, a congressman from New York, specifically from New York City itself, in Manhattan. He was a strongly anti-war Democrat. He'd previously been mayor of New York City, was briefly arrested by the New York State militia, and charged with inciting a riot in 1857, when he refused to allow the newly created Metropolitan Police to replace the municipal police, which he had used as a tool of the Democratic Party. During a later term as mayor of New York City at the start of the Civil War, he proposed that New York City itself secede from the Union and become a free city, a completely independent country that could trade with the North or the South or whomever. And as shown in the movie, Fernando Wood was one of the leaders of the opposition to ratifying the 13th Amendment. Now, number 26 may not be strictly speaking true. We don't know really where Seward and Merrick spoke, but they are depicting standing in front by a glass case holding a leg. And there really is a leg, the leg pictured in the movie, in the Army Medical Museum, which was donated to the museum by General Daniel Sickles. His leg was shot off during the second day of the Battle of Gettysburg, and he donated the leg to the Army Medical Museum and visited his leg every year on July 2nd. And the bones of the leg are still there, preserved in the museum. And furthermore, the men shown working for Seward in the movie, known as the Seward Lobby in real life, were real people. Although in reality they spent a lot more time in New York City trying to influence newspaper editors to write articles and editorials in favor of the amendment than they spent bribing congressmen in Washington, D.C. They were in general more respectable and respected people than shown in the movie. In the movie they're after money. In reality, at least one refused any payment for his services, saying he had done it just for the cause of ending slavery. Number 32 mentions the House Ways and Means Committee investigating Mary Lincoln's household accounts, which is true. At one point, Mrs. Lincoln spent so much money redecorating the White House that she was investigated by Congress, and Lincoln was embarrassed that she had spent so much money, as he put it, on flub dubs while the nation was at war. He repaid part of the expense out of his own pocket. Number 33, Stevens wants full equality, the Negro vote, and seizure of rebel property. And that is true. Stevens wanted to completely reshape and punish the South. And he truly did want full equality for black people, something even many Northerners didn't necessarily want. Number 35 is basically true. Lincoln said the American South might have spread slavery into South America. Of course, the Missouri Compromise had originally said that any state created south of Missouri's southern border could allow slavery. And so there was some fear among Northerners the South would keep pushing south. There had even been private attempts in the 1850s by some Southerners to take over parts of Mexico, which was very briefly done by a Tennessean named William Walker. William Walker took over Nicaragua for a time before being run out by a combination of different Central American countries supported by the British. He tried to take over Nicaragua, but was captured and executed. Probably not Nicaragua, Honduras. There were invasions of Cuba, which also failed, but attempts that certainly could have provoked wars between the U.S. and these countries, as Southerners, at least some, hoped to expand slavery by taking over Central and South and Caribbean American countries. Number 36, Representative George Yeaman worries that ending slavery would mean giving black people the vote. He says Negroes in the film, of course, even giving women the vote, which sounds pretty scary. But in fact, later on, many white Southerners would support giving women the vote, partly in hopes they would more than counterbalance the votes of black men. Number 39 says, at this point, nearly 600,000 lives have been lost in the war, and that's certainly true, although it may be an underestimate. 600,000 deaths in the war was, for a long time, the most popular estimate of deaths. Historians have lately increased that estimate to 6,500, even 700,000 Americans dying in the war, if we count North and South together. Even if it's 600,000, that's 2% of the entire American population. 1 out of every 50 people dying in the war. Number 41 shows us the Peace Commission being taken to Hampton Roads, Virginia, not to Washington, where they did meet on a ship off the coast, a little steamboat called the River Queen. That and almost everything they show about the meetings with the Peace Commission are true. Again, a few things are compressed to make things quicker for the movie. Number 45, we have Lincoln and his son Robert going to visit an army hospital where Robert sees a pit full of amputated arms and legs, which is certainly true. There were massive piles and mass burial pits for all the arms and legs amputated in military hospitals. The lead bullets and musket balls, mostly bullets by this point, that were fired from the guns at the time were still relatively soft lead and went relatively slowly compared to modern bullets. When they hit a bone, they would spread out and pulverize it. For surgeons in a hurry, amputating the limb was about the only way to deal with that. It was pretty hard to set such a bone. So arms and legs were amputated in enormous numbers, often without anesthesia, and also without an idea of sterilization, which won't be developed till a few years later, so that many people died of subsequent infections. Number 47, Lincoln agrees to let Robert be an adjutant for General Grant, which is true. He was given the rank of captain. Really, it was Mary Lincoln more than Abraham Lincoln who kept Robert out of the Army for so long. In fact, President Lincoln, was a bit embarrassed that Robert was getting special treatment. He said every mother would keep her son out of the Army if she could. But Lincoln wasn't, I guess, ready to have a fight with Mary about that at that time. In number 48, Lincoln once threatened to send his wife to the insane asylum, who was quite possibly true. The madhouse, they say, in number 48. Indeed, later on, after their son Tad died in 1871, she became increasingly erratic. Understandably, as she'd lost her husband and 3 of her 4 sons, she had trouble managing her own money, not that she was ever great at that. And her last son, Robert Lincoln, was first put in charge of her finances and later had her committed to a mental institution in 1875 against her will. She managed, though, to smuggle letters out to friends who found a lawyer who got her released after 3 months, put back in charge of her own money. She and her final son, Robert, never really had much of a relationship after that. Number 49 says even 50-cent pieces have Lincoln's face on them, which is not true. In 1869, Lincoln did appear on a 50-cent note. 50 cents in those days being worth enough, you could even have a bit of paper money. He wouldn't appear on a coin, though, until the Lincoln cent was issued until 1909 for his 100th birthday. In fact, no real person appeared on a normal U.S. coin until Lincoln did in 1909. Prior to that, they typically depicted a symbolic Lady Liberty on most American coins, and some simply had a number on them. All the nickel had the face of an Indian on one side and a buffalo on the reverse by the early 20th century. But the Lincoln cent in 1909 would be the first to have a real person on it. Now, number 52, saying Lincoln's father did not want to compete with slave plantations, was one part of the free soil movement, the desire to keep any new states from allowing slavery. Certainly there was a moral desire to stop slavery spread, but also many small farmers who wanted to settle out west feared they couldn't compete with large plantations. Not only did they disapprove of slavery on a moral ground, they also didn't want to have their own work, their own wage pay, undercut by unpaid labor. Number 56, which points out that making a false representation to Congress is impeachable, although that's only true if you make your false statement under oath. You can technically, I guess, lie if you're not under oath. If you're under oath, though, it's different, as Bill Clinton could tell us. Number 57, in which representatives from Connecticut vote first and vote against the amendment, is not true. First of all, in the House of Representatives, representatives do not vote by state, rather alphabetically by their own last name, at least till 1973, when they began casting their votes electronically by putting a card in electronic voting machines scattered throughout the House chamber. Furthermore, all the representatives from Connecticut supported the amendment. They're just depicting as opposing it in the movie for the sake of drama. Indeed, shortly after the movie was released, a modern congressman from Connecticut wrote a letter of complaint to Steven Spielberg, wanting an apology for making Connecticut look like it was not opposed to slavery. Spielberg basically said, hey, it's a movie. Number 60, we see Thaddeus Stevens get home and get into bed with his housekeeper, his black housekeeper. We don't absolutely know that this happened, but it was widely rumored at the time that Thaddeus Stevens had a long-standing romantic relationship, essentially an unspoken marriage with his mixed-race housekeeper, Lydia Hamilton Smith. And most historians think those rumors were true. Certainly he left her a lot of money and any furniture she wanted in his will. And she used the money to buy the house they had lived in for herself. And Stevens, by the way, when he died, was buried in an integrated cemetery with black and white corpses in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Lydia, though, was buried elsewhere in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, in a Catholic cemetery. Number 62 is true. Lincoln wanted the southern states to return to their relations with the Union immediately, at least as soon as possible. Because although he did believe there was no way to maintain slavery. According to Alexander Stevens, who's the only person to have written about the meeting in detail, Lincoln even suggested at the peace conference he might be able to get Congress to spend $400 million to help reimburse Southerners for their slaves. It would have only worked out to about $100 per slave, much less than their full value.